The streetlights flickered over Cedar Avenue, casting long shadows on the cracked pavement. Jamal Carter's sneakers squeaked as he jogged past the corner bodega, the summer air sticky against his skin. He carried his backpack slung over one shoulder, textbooks rattling inside. It should have been just another evening run, the kind he often used to clear his mind. But the sudden screech of tires made him freeze. "Hey, stop right there," barked a voice. Officer Daniel Monroe stepped out, badge glinting, face set in that familiar scowl. Jamal's stomach tightened. He knew the drill. The random stops, the accusatory glares, the whispered assumptions that followed him like a shadow. "I said stop," Monroe repeated, looming over him. "What did I do?" Jamal asked, his voice steady despite the panic rising in his chest. "You're hopeless," Monroe spat, the words slicing through the humid night air like a knife. "Probably destined to end up on the wrong side of the law." Neighbors peeked from their windows. Jamal's fists clenched, but he didn't move. He'd been humiliated enough tonight, and he wouldn't give Monroe the satisfaction of running. Monroe's flashlight scanned him, sharp and accusing. Jamal felt the weight of judgment, centuries of it, pressing down on his shoulders. Then, a phone buzzed in Monroe's pocket, an unknown number. He answered, frowning, and Jamal caught the last words before the officer froze. "What? He's what? No, that can't be." Jamal's pulse quickened, sensing the shift in power, the unseen reckoning just beginning. The officer's face went pale, his authority cracking, just as Jamal realized Monroe had no idea who he really was. And the night held its breath. The streetlights flickered over Cedar Avenue, painting long, trembling shadows across the cracked asphalt. Jamal Carter jogged with careful rhythm, the hum of his sneakers against the pavement marking the slow beat of the late summer evening. The air smelled faintly of roasted peanuts from the corner bodega, mixed with the sharp tang of hot asphalt. A phone buzzed in his pocket, and he ignored it, focusing on the cooling breeze brushing his neck. Then came the screech of tires, abrupt and jarring. Jamal froze, chest tightening. A patrol car slid to a stop, lights washing the street in red and blue. "Hey, stop right there," barked a voice that made his stomach knot. Jamal turned, instinctively slowing his pace. Officer Daniel Monroe stepped out, boots clicking against the concrete. His badge caught the streetlight, gleaming like a weapon. "What's going on?" Jamal asked, keeping his voice level, though the hairs on his arms stood on end. "You're jogging in the wrong place," Monroe said, stepping closer. His eyes narrowed. "I don't like your type hanging around here after dark." "I live 2 blocks that way," Jamal said, pointing. "I'm heading home." Monroe snorted. "Yeah, doesn't look like it. You look hopeless." The word cut through the night like a blade. Probably destined to end up on the wrong side of the law anyway. A couple of neighbors peeked from their windows. The shutters rattled lightly, a faint chorus of judgment and fear. Jamal swallowed. He'd been stopped dozens of times, accused without cause, humiliated in silence. But Monroe's words landed differently tonight, cold, sharp, personal. "I'm not hopeless," Jamal said, voice taut but calm. "I'm just trying to get home." Monroe stepped forward, flashlight cutting across Jamal's chest. "Don't get smart with me, kid. You think because you're young you can—" A phone buzzed in Monroe's pocket, making him flinch. He pulled it out, squinting at the screen. "Hello." Jamal's heart thudded. He sensed a shift in the air, subtle at first, then undeniable. Monroe's voice faltered. "What? He's what? No, that can't be. Wait." "Slow down," Monroe muttered, face paling. His authoritative mask cracked, and he glanced at Jamal with something between fear and disbelief. "Is there something I should know?" Jamal asked, voice steady, curious. Monroe's jaw tightened. He ended the call abruptly, shoving the phone back into his pocket. For a moment, he just stared at Jamal, the usual arrogance absent, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. You hear about the council elections?" Monroe finally said, voice low. You're involved in that?" Jamal didn't answer immediately. He let Monroe squirm, the silence stretching until it was almost unbearable. I have to go," Monroe stammered finally, backing toward his patrol car. The flashlight beam wavered, as if it too had sensed a shift in power. Jamal exhaled, tension coiling in his chest like a spring. He kept his gaze steady, watching Monroe retreat into the car. The engine hummed, then roared away, leaving the street dark again, save for the sputtering streetlights. He stood there for a moment, fists unclenching, heart still racing. Cedar Avenue smelled of asphalt and night air, but now it carried a new weight, a quiet recognition that the world sometimes underestimated him, that some people feared him without knowing why. He jogged the remaining blocks home, mind spinning with the implications. He had never wanted attention. His work on the city council had been deliberate, cautious, a careful exercise in patience and discipline. But Monroe's words, meant to wound, had only reminded Jamal the stakes, that in every corner of the city, authority could bend cruelly against him, even when it earned respect in ways others ignored. At home, Jamal leaned against the front door, unlocking it with practiced fingers. His mother, Tanya Carter, was in the kitchen, the scent of fried chicken mingling with herbs and garlic. She looked up as he entered, a frown forming. "You okay?" she asked, setting a pan down. "Yeah," he said, though the memory of Monroe's sneer lingered. "Just another evening on Cedar Avenue." Tanya's eyes narrowed, sharp and protective. "Another stop?" Jamal nodded. "He called me hopeless. Said I'd end up on the wrong side of the law." Tanya's hand tightened around the wooden spoon. "Daniel Monroe?" He nodded again. "Yeah, he seemed different tonight. Like he heard something, like he realized who I am." She sighed, pulled him into a quick hug. "You've got to be careful, Jamal. People don't change overnight. So will never see past their own prejudices. But you're strong. You know who you are, and that's all that matters." Jamal leaned into her shoulder, grateful for the warmth. He'd faced hostility before, but tonight was different. Tonight, the balance had subtly shifted. Monroe's confidence, once absolute, had faltered. And though the officer didn't yet know it fully, the man he tried to belittle had power far beyond the uniform he wore. Later, Jamal settled into his room, city lights spilling in through the blinds. His textbooks were scattered across the desk, council documents neatly stacked beside them. He tapped his fingers lightly against the table, replaying the encounter over and over. He had learned to measure his reactions, to keep his anger in check, but he couldn't ignore the pulse of satisfaction that hummed beneath his calm exterior. Because justice, he knew, didn't always need to be loud. Sometimes it arrived quietly, in the form of recognition, the subtle unraveling of authority when the truth became impossible to ignore. And tonight, Jamal's sense it had begun. Outside, the city murmured with life. Cars rolled past. Distant music floated from an open window, and somewhere a dog barked. But Cedar Avenue, under those flickering streetlights, had shifted slightly in his favor. Monroe's authority had faltered, and Jamal's future, his voice, his influence, his resilience, was just beginning to press against the cracks of the world's assumptions. He closed his eyes, listening to the hum of the city. Tomorrow, he would return to work on the council. Tomorrow, he would face Monroe again. But for now, he let himself feel the quiet thrill of power reclaimed. Not through rage, but through presence calm and the unyielding proof that a young black man could not be dismissed so easily. And somewhere in the dark, Jamal felt Monroe's gaze linger, even from a distance, wary and uncertain, a harbinger of the storm that was yet to come. The morning sun seeped through the blinds, striping Jamal's room with gold. He sat at his desk, tapping a pen against a stack of council documents. The glow of his laptop screen reflected faintly in his glasses. Emails, meeting notes, and community petitions blurred together, a mosaic of responsibility for a city that had voted for him despite his age, despite the skepticism whispered behind closed doors. A knock on the door broke his focus. "Morning," said his mother, Tanya, holding a tray with coffee and toast. She placed it carefully on his desk. "You slept at all last night?" Jamal shook his head. "Not really. I kept thinking about last night." Tanya set down the tray and leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Monroe, huh?" He nodded. "Yeah, he stopped me again." called me hopeless. But I think he realized something. Something about me. Something about you? She raised an eyebrow. You mean that you're more than he thought? I guess, Jamal said, sighing. He got a call during the stop. He sounded shaken afterward, like he didn't know what to do with me. Tanya's frown deepened. Jamal, don't underestimate him. Some of these officers are dangerous when they feel threatened. You know that. You've seen it. Just because he faltered doesn't mean he's gone. Jamal chewed his lip, aware of the truth in her words. Monroe's authority had been absolute for years, reinforced by the silence of bystanders and the complicity of peers. But now, with Jamal's election, with his voice amplified, Monroe had stumbled, and that stumble could turn ugly. Mom, I'm not scared of him, Jamal said finally, more firmly than he felt. I'm ready. Tanya shook her head, sighing. I hope you are. Just be careful. Some people don't forgive the young, the black, the ambitious. Jamal gave a small smile and focused on the laptop. His emails were already filling with requests from community members, volunteers, and local journalists. He had become, overnight, a symbol of hope for some and a threat for others. The council office had called, confirming his attendance at the day's meetings. The weight of expectation pressed down, but Jamal had learned early to carry it steadily. His phone buzzed again, this time a text from Marcus, his campaign manager and longtime friend. Marcus, heard about Monroe? Careful, man. Dude's not used to seeing someone like you in power. Stay smart. Jamal typed a quick reply. Jamal, thanks. I've got this. Just tired of being the kid they underestimate. Marcus's response came instantly. Marcus, that's exactly why you're the one who'll change things. Don't let him see you sweat. Jamal leaned back in his chair, letting the morning sunlight wash over him. He thought about his first day on the council, the speeches he had prepared, the policy initiatives he wanted to push. He wanted to focus on the community, on education, on housing, but Monroe's shadow loomed large, a reminder that authority was often wielded as a weapon, not a tool. By mid-morning, he was at City Hall. The building's marble floors gleamed under fluorescent lights, polished yet cold. Council members greeted him with polite nods, some welcoming, some dismissive. Whispers followed him down the corridors. Half admiration, half doubt. In the council chamber, Jamal found his seat, glancing around at the older members, most of whom had been in politics for decades. Papers rustled. Phones buzzed discreetly. Conversations dipped into hushed tones when he entered. He felt the weight of their scrutiny, a silent judgment. Jamal, you're early, said Councilwoman Edna Whitman, her tone neutral but her eyes sharp. Ready for your first meeting? As ready as I'll ever be, he replied. She smiled faintly, a mixture of warmth and professional assessment. Don't let them rattle you. This place is full of walls. Jamal's hands rested on the polished wood of the desk. I know. I've learned that already. The mayor called the session to order, and Jamal listened as colleagues debated budgets and zoning changes. Monroe's name slipped into discussion unexpectedly. Over a routine neighborhood patrol report, Jamal noticed several members glanced toward the empty doorway, subtle cues of worry or disapproval, though Monroe was not present. Later, during a short break, Jamal stepped into the hallway. Two aides were whispering near the entrance. He's barely 22, one said, and he's already running circles around Monroe's precinct influence. The other nodded. Yeah, the kid's sharp. Monroe's going to push back hard. You watch. Jamal's jaw tightened, though his expression remained calm. He had anticipated resistance, but hearing it spoken aloud made the stakes clearer. Monroe would try to assert control, to undermine him at every turn, if given the chance. By lunchtime, Jamal had met with a group of young community activists. They were eager, full of questions about policy and outreach. He answered each patiently, careful to avoid arrogance, but firm in his vision. You make it sound possible, said Lila, a local student activist, like the system could actually work for us. It can, Jamal replied, but only if we push against the people who want to keep it from working. We can't be polite about injustice all the time. The words resonated, both with the young activists and with Jamal himself. He thought of Monroe, still out there, simmering with unease and disbelief, unaware that the teen he belittled carried the authority to challenge him. By the time the council meeting resumed, Monroe had appeared outside the building, leaning against a patrol car, phone in hand. Jamal caught sight of him from a window. Their eyes met for a brief moment. Monroe's full of conflict, Jamal's steady and measured. The officer's presence was a subtle reminder. Power, when threatened, could turn cruel. But Jamal had learned the lesson of his own life. Authority could be countered with patience, wit, and resilience. As the session wrapped up, Jamal packed his papers. Standing to leave, a journalist approached, notebook ready. "Councilman Carter, any response to the rumors about Officer Monroe's reaction to your election?" Jamal paused, then smiled faintly. "I focus on solutions, not distractions. But yes, I believe some people are realizing that the world doesn't revolve around their assumptions anymore." The journalist scribbled furiously. Jamal felt the power of presence, of calm control, of being unshakable in the face of prejudice. Monroe could scowl, sneer, and whisper threats, but Jamal had walls stronger than Cedar Avenue, walls built of resolve, intellect, and community support. As he walked out into the warm afternoon sun, Jamal realized something profound. The city could whisper, and some walls would block him, but with every step, every decision, every calculated response, the walls themselves would be turned into stepping stones. And Monroe, Jamal knew the officer would learn in time that the young man he called hopeless was anything but. The city council chamber hummed with anticipation. Sunlight glinted off the polished wooden desks and brass nameplates, and the smell of fresh coffee mingled with the faint scent of old paper. Jamal Carter walked through the chamber doorway, shoulders squared, heartbeat steady despite the buzz of murmurs around him. This was his first official council session since the election, and the room felt both familiar and electric. "Councilman Carter," called Mayor Reynolds, a tall man with silver hair and a firm jaw. "We're glad you're here." "Thank you, Mayor," Jamal replied, his voice calm and precise. Whispers followed him as he moved his seat. "Did you see the kid's speech last night?" Someone muttered. "Barely 22, and already on top of city politics." "Yeah," another voice said. "He might be young, but he's sharp, smarter than half this chamber." Jamal adjusted his papers, keeping his expression neutral. Every eye in the room seemed to weigh him, to calculate whether he was a symbol, a threat, or simply an anomaly. He had anticipated scrutiny, but the intensity of it, the way older members leaned forward subtly, the half-smiles that were part admiration, part disbelief, was a lesson in how authority could be both enforced and undermined. Mayor Reynolds cleared his throat. "Let's begin with the budget review." Jamal watched his colleagues debated, some passionately, some distractedly. He noted the subtle tactics used to marginalize newer voices. Interruptions, quiet dismissals, coded language that seemed innocent on the surface but carried centuries of exclusion beneath. "Councilman Carter," Councilwoman Whitman leaned toward him, whispering, "they'll try to sideline you today. Remember your preparation. Stick to the facts." "I will," he murmured back, eyes scanning the room. Soon, the discussion shifted to a proposed public safety measure, specifically patrol zoning that directly overlapped with neighborhoods Monroe oversaw. Jamal leaned forward, voice steady, emphasizing data and community concerns. "The residents in these areas have repeatedly voiced that increased patrols don't make them safer," he said, fingers tracing graphs on his tablet. "In fact, they've expressed distrust and anxiety. Our policies must reflect both safety and equity." A murmur ran through the room. Some nodded, others frowned. Monroe's name came up indirectly, in reference to effectiveness of current patrol officers. Jamal stayed calm, knowing the officer would eventually hear about it. During the break, Jamal found himself surrounded by reporters. Cameras clicked, not in an aggressive way, but in that subtle, omnipresent manner that amplified every gesture. "Councilman Carter," one reporter asked, notebook poised, "how does it feel to be the youngest elected councilman in city history?" Jamal gave a faint, measured smile. "It's an honor, but my focus isn't on age or milestones, it's on people. On ensuring that every resident feels heard and protected, regardless of where they live or what assumptions others make about them." Another reporter interjected, almost casually. Some critics suggest that your election challenges long-standing power structures, particularly in public safety departments. Are you concerned about pushback? Jamal met her gaze steadily. Change is always met with resistance. But when the resistance is rooted in prejudice rather than policy, it's not just pushback. It's an opportunity to illuminate systemic flaws. And I plan to do exactly that. By mid-afternoon, the council resumed. Monroe's patrol record had been forwarded to the council office as part of routine oversight. Jamal received a subtle text from Marcus. Marcus, Monroe's already twitching. You're rattling him without a word. Jamal smiled faintly and typed back. Jamal, good. Let him sweat. Let's see how authority reacts when it meets competence. The chamber filled with the low hum of discussion again. Jamal stood to address a motion concerning youth programs, highlighting underfunded schools and the importance of mentorship. His words were precise, persuasive, carrying the weight of lived experience and meticulous preparation. Young people in our neighborhoods need guidance, not suspicion, he said, voice steady. We can't rely solely on patrols to define their futures. Investment in education and community programs will create safer, more equitable outcomes than any officer's assumptions ever could. Council members shifted in their seats. Some exchanged approving glances. Others threatened, frowned. Jamal noticed a few taking notes, likely to counter his arguments, while journalists scribbled furiously, sensing the potency of his presence. Outside the chamber, Monroe watched from across the street, leaning against the car. He scrolled through live news updates on his phone, his face tight with disbelief. The young man he had dismissed publicly, the hopeless kid, was standing in front of the city, commanding attention, respect, and influence. Monroe's jaw clenched. Every word Jamal spoke was a quiet indictment of the officer's assumptions as authority and his perceived control over the neighborhood. Back in the chamber, Jamal concluded his remarks. We have an opportunity here, he said, voice firm, to lead with understanding, not fear, to act with justice, not prejudice, and to show that the next generation of leadership is ready, capable, and unafraid to challenge the status quo. Applause rippled through the room. Some colleagues smiled warmly. Others muttered under their breath. Jamal allowed himself a brief moment of satisfaction, knowing that the subtle tremor he had planted in Monroe's confidence would echo far beyond Cedar Avenue. After the session, Jamal walked through the marble corridors with his assistant, Kamal. You handled that beautifully, Kamal said. You didn't just speak, you owned the room. I just spoke the truth, Jamal replied. That's all we have sometimes. Truth and consistency. Everything else is noise. They reached the exit, and Jamal glanced back. The council chamber had witnessed the first public unveiling of his authority, a declaration that he was more than his age, more than a target, more than the assumptions of men like Monroe. Outside, the city's noise wrapped around him. Sirens, chatter, distant construction. He felt eyes on him, somewhere in the shadows, lingering, calculating. Monroe's presence was not immediate, but Jamal knew it was inevitable. He stopped at the street corner, watching a group of teenagers cross the road, laughing and carrying backpacks. He imagined them in a few years, facing similar judgments, similar streets. He felt a deep, unspoken responsibility, one that went beyond votes or speeches. Hey, Councilman Carter, one of the teens called, waving. Nice speech today. Jamal smiled and nodded. Thank you. Keep pushing forward. Don't let anyone tell you who you can or cannot be. The words carried farther than he realized. Across the street, Monroe clenched his fist in the patrol car, jaw tight, phone in hand. He had seen the council sessions. Highlights. He had read the live updates. And he had finally realized that the young man he had called hopeless had stepped into a spotlight that no badge, no patrol, and no prejudice could dim. Monroe's face went pale. His authority, once absolute in his mind, had been quietly undermined, and the seed of doubt had taken root. Jamal didn't see the officer, but he felt the shift, a subtle, almost imperceptible victory. Because being underestimated was no longer a weakness. It was a weapon. Jamal walked down the street, toward his car, calm, composed, resolute. He had revealed himself to the city, to the council, and to Monroe. And in that revelation, he had begun to reclaim the narrative, one city block, one council session, one word at a time. The world was watching now. Monroe would have to reckon with that, and Jamal would be ready. The city hall lobby smelled of polished wood and recycled air, a faint hint of coffee lingering from the morning rush. Jamal Carter moved deliberately through the crowd, briefcase in hand, eyes scanning for familiar faces. Every step was measured, purposeful, because he knew the world often scrutinized young black men more than any policy they presented. Councilman Carter, an assistant called, "The Community Planning Committee is waiting for you." "On my way," Jamal said, his voice calm, betraying none of the irritation curling in his chest. Inside the committee room, the air felt tighter, the conversations heavier. Several senior officers were present, including a lieutenant who glanced at Jamal with a subtle mix of disdain and condescension. Monroe's name came up repeatedly in conversation, not directly, but through phrases like efficiency concerns or performance metrics. Jamal noticed the coded language, words chosen to undermine, to question authority without overt accusation. "Are you suggesting that Officer Monroe is overstepping?" one council member asked. "I'm suggesting," Jamal said carefully, "that repeated complaints from residents indicate a pattern of enforcement that does not serve the community equitably. The goal is public safety, but safety must be paired with trust." A senior officer cleared his throat. "With all due respect, Councilman, enforcement metrics don't lie. Monroe has consistently met targets. Perhaps the complaints reflect perception rather than reality." Jamal met his gaze, unwavering. Perception is reality when it impacts lives. Residents report feeling harassed, anxious, and unsafe in their own neighborhoods. Those experiences deserve attention. Murmurs of agreement floated through the room, but the coded skepticism lingered like a shadow. Monroe had trained officers to respond to authority with deference. To challenge that subtly, through data and measured speech, was to confront a system embedded in decades of unquestioned hierarchy. During a break, Jamal walked past Monroe's precinct office for a scheduled inspection. Monroe's patrol car sat outside, engine idling, phone in hand. Jamal caught his reflection in the tinted window, poised, controlled, aware. Monroe looked up, eyes narrowing, but Jamal continued on without a flicker of hesitation. "Councilman Carter," a patrol lieutenant muttered under his breath as Jamal passed. "You've got him rattled." "I'm just doing my job," Jamal said, voice calm, but internally savoring the quiet shift of authority. Back in the committee room, a series of microaggressions began to surface, subtle but deliberate. Monroe's lieutenant questioned Jamal's understanding of precinct operations. Another officer implied that youth programs were idealistic, not practical. Jamal answered each challenge with data, anecdotes, and clear vision, refusing to let the bias behind the questions derail him. "You're too focused on perception," one officer said, a slight edge in his tone. "Metrics are metrics. Metrics without context are meaningless," Jamal replied. "Numbers don't capture fear, humiliation, or community distrust. Ignoring those factors is dangerous." A quiet tension settled over the room. Some colleagues nodded in agreement. Others shifted uncomfortably, unsure how to challenge a councilman who balanced politeness with authority. Later, in the hallway, a young aide approached Jamal nervously. "Sir, some of the senior officers are uncomfortable with your approach. They say you disrupt the natural order." Jamal paused, leaning against the wall. "Uncomfortable because I demand fairness, or because I remind them that authority isn't absolute?" The aide shrugged. "Probably both." Jamal smiled faintly. "Good. That means we're moving in the right direction." Monroe appeared again outside the building during a scheduled patrol check. He stepped out of his car as Jamal exited the meeting room, phone buzzing incessantly. His glare followed Jamal, sharp and accusing, but Jamal did not flinch. The officer's presence was a reminder of how authority could be weaponized, but also how fragile that authority could become when confronted with evidence and composure. "You're really pushing it, kid," Monroe said, voice low but audible. "Do you have any idea what you're messing with?" "I have an idea," Jamal replied calmly, not stopping, walking past him. "I'm making sure the people I represent are safe. Not terrified, not belittled, not overlooked. Monroe's jaw tightened, hands balling into fists. Jamal could see the inner battle. Pride versus professionalism, bias versus reason, control versus a realization that his assumptions were being challenged in public. During a council lunch, Jamal sat with fellow council members and activists, debriefing the morning. Every question, every challenge, it's not personal, he said quietly, stirring his coffee. It's systemic. It's the culture they've inherited. They don't even recognize their bias half the time. Does it frustrate you? Asked Lila, a student activist. It does, Jamal admitted. But frustration alone doesn't change anything. Strategy does. Patience does. Evidence does. The conversation was interrupted by a staff member delivering an urgent message. Monroe had filed an internal complaint about obstruction of duties and questioning authority. During the committee review, Jamal read the summary carefully, suppressing a small smile. Looks like he's trying to assert control, he said, voice calm, though the tension hummed beneath the surface. Do we respond? Kamal asked. Yes, Jamal replied. We respond with facts, not emotion. That's how you handle someone who's trying to intimidate through hierarchy instead of reason. By mid-afternoon, the council session resumed. Jamal presented a detailed report on community engagement initiatives, highlighting both successes and areas for improvement. Every paragraph was precise, every statistic carefully sourced. He deliberately contrasted Monroe's patrol metrics with community feedback, subtly illustrating the disconnect between authority and lived experience. A council member interrupted, thinly veiled criticism in her tone. Councilman Carter, while your report is thorough, do you consider that officers may feel undermined by constant scrutiny? They should, Jamal replied evenly. When actions erode trust, scrutiny is necessary. Accountability isn't optional. Authority is a shield against critique. The chamber fell silent, the weight of his words pressing against the walls. Jamal had never shouted, never raised his voice, yet every phrase landed like a hammer on assumptions built over decades. After meeting, Jamal stepped outside, inhaling the humid air. Monroe's patrol car was still there, parked under a tree. The officer's glare followed him as he crossed the street, phone in hand, muttering under his breath. Jamal met his gaze briefly, calm, unwavering. This was a battle of presence, patience, and perception. Monroe could try to assert dominance, could file complaints, could whisper behind closed doors. But Jamal's composure, his intelligence, and his undeniable authority were shields that no uniform could pierce. The afternoon sun reflected off the council chamber windows, throwing streaks of light across Jamal Carter's neatly stacked documents. Outside, the city buzzed with life. Buses rumbled, car horns honked, and somewhere a dog barked. Jamal knew that in a few hours, that calm would be replaced by chaos. It started subtly, a small clip posted online showing Monroe confronting Jamal during the morning committee. The officer's glare was sharp, his voice harsh, while Jamal's calm, precise responses created an unmistakable contrast. The video captured a phrase Monroe had muttered under his breath. You don't know your place, and it spread almost instantly. Jamal's phone buzzed incessantly. Text notifications, messages from journalists, constituents, and friends poured in. Marcus's message blinked on the screen. Marcus, it's everywhere, man. You're trending. People are seeing him for what he is. Jamal exhaled slowly. He had anticipated scrutiny, but not this velocity of exposure. A mixture of pride and apprehension surged through him. The clip had gone viral, and with it, Monroe's authority teetered. He sat in his office, scrolling through comments. Some were supportive, praising his composure and courage. Others were defensive, attacking his age or insinuating that he was overstepping. He ignored the vitriol, focusing instead on what mattered. The truth was out. A knock on the door interrupted him. It was Councilwoman Whitman. Jamal, have you seen the clip? She asked, her tone cautious but concerned. Yes, he said, keeping his expression neutral. I expected Monroe to act out, but this is beyond anything I imagined. The public is watching, and he knows it. Whitman shook her head. Be careful. Exposure can be a double-edged sword. He'll try to spin this, manipulate it, or worse. Jamal nodded. I understand, but the truth is already out. Facts are facts. By late afternoon, Jamal had a scheduled public appearance at a community center. Word of the video's virality had reached the local neighborhood, and a crowd of supporters and curious onlookers gathered outside. Cameras, phones, and social media live streams captured every moment. You've got quite an audience today, Kamal said, adjusting a microphone. Jamal smiled faintly. They deserve to know the truth. Not filtered, not whispered, not softened, just the truth. As Jamal approached the podium, a news crew began recording. The reporter, microphone extended, asked, Councilman Carter, how do you respond to the viral video showing your confrontation with Officer Monroe? Jamal cleared his throat, steadying himself. I respond with the reality of life for many residents. Authority should serve the people, not intimidate them. What the video captures is a moment of everyday bias, the type that's often invisible but profoundly impactful. This is not just about one officer. It's about systemic patterns that demand accountability. The crowd murmured, some nodding in agreement, others whispering questions. Jamal continued, voice growing stronger. Fear and intimidation have no place in our neighborhoods. We must confront them, speak about them, and insist on fairness. I'm proud to be a voice for those who've been silenced for too long. Behind the cameras, Monroe sat in his patrol car, phone in hand, scrolling through news coverage. His face was pale, jaw tight, eyes flicking from screen to screen. Comments criticized him, questioned his professionalism, and highlighted the viral clip. The public eye, once indifferent, now weighed heavily on him. Monroe muttered under his breath, This can't be happening. He's just a kid. He can't do this to me. Jamal returned to his office after the public event, where emails and texts awaited. Some were from community leaders offering support. Others were calls for formal complaints and investigations. His phone rang incessantly, but he remained calm, methodical. Marcus leaned against the doorway. He's panicking. Internal memos are flying. PR teams are scrambling. He didn't expect this. I anticipated some reaction, Jamal said, voice measured. But the virality changes the stakes. Monroe can no longer operate in shadows. Now the community, the media, and his colleagues are watching. The evening brought an internal city council meeting, emergency in tone. Monroe's actions were being dissected. His repeated stops, procedural errors, and now the viral video. Jamal entered the room with quiet authority, prepared to answer questions and present facts. Councilman Briggs, a senior member, addressed the room. We've received reports and citizen complaints regarding Officer Monroe's conduct. Coupled with a viral video, this raises serious concerns about professional behavior and community trust. Jamal nodded, standing. I've documented multiple instances of similar behavior, and while this video captures a specific encounter, it's representative of a pattern. The question is not whether one officer misstepped. It's whether the system allows bias to go unchecked. The room was tense, officers shifting in their seats, some defensive, others uneasy. Monroe remained silent. Seated at the back, his glare fixed on Jamal. You speak with remarkable composure, Councilwoman Whitman said, her tone almost admiring. Even when the situation is hostile, you maintain authority without aggression. Jamal offered a small smile. Composure is necessary when confronting systemic issues. Anger alone does not create change. It only fuels conflict. After the meeting, Jamal returned home, weary but resolute. The neighborhood buzzed with conversations about the viral clip, and local news channels replayed segments, dissecting every word. His mother, Tanya, shook her head as he entered. I saw it. People are talking everywhere. This could get messy. Jamal poured himself a glass of water. It already is messy, but people are seeing the truth. Monroe can no longer dictate the narrative. Facts are facts, and now the world sees them. Tanya placed a hand on his shoulder. Just remember, Jamal, exposure is powerful, but it comes with a price. Stay vigilant. I will, he said, setting the glass down. I've learned patience, strategy, and resilience. That's what this requires, not reactionary anger. Later, lying in bed, Jamal scrolled through the clip one more time. The comments were a mixture of outrage, support, and disbelief. Monroe's sneer, the subtle condescension, the assumption that Jamal was hopeless, all of it was now public record. He thought of the power dynamics, the systemic injustices, and the long road ahead. Monroe would react, push back, try to reclaim authority, but the moment had shifted. The public, once indifferent, now watched, judged, and demanded accountability. And Jamal felt something rare and profound, the quiet satisfaction of witnessing truth triumph, not through anger, but through patience, evidence, and unwavering composure. Outside, the city lights glimmered, streets buzzing with ordinary life. Somewhere, Monroe scrolled through another feed, muttering under his breath, realizing that the man he once called hopeless had turned the narrative, revealed the bias, and claimed the moral high ground. And the night held its breath, knowing this confrontation was far from over, but that power, unchecked by truth, could no longer dominate without consequence. The morning air was crisp as Jamal walked toward the community center, the city buzzing with cars and voices. Flyers for youth programs fluttered against lampposts, and the distant hum of a lawnmower carried across the street. He could feel the tension lingering from the viral video, a shadow following him into every meeting, every conversation, every hallway. Inside, journalists were already setting up cameras. Council aides hurried back and forth with notes and schedules. Jamal adjusted his jacket and took a steadying breath, his mind running through talking points for the morning panel discussion. Today, the focus was public safety, community oversight, and the responsibility of witnesses, those who saw injustice but often stayed silent. Councilman Carter called Lila, the student activist from earlier. People are lining up outside. They want to hear what you think about Monroe's latest report. I'll speak to the facts, Jamal replied, keeping his tone calm. Emotion doesn't change policy. Clarity does. The panel began, cameras capturing every angle. A senior officer, sitting to the side, gave Jamal a cold glare. Monroe was absent but already making calls, arranging legal counsel, tried to anticipate the fallout from the viral incident. Young man, a journalist began, some citizens claim that your confrontation with Officer Monroe is divisive. How do you respond to those who see your actions as provocative? Jamal's gaze was steady. I confront bias, not people. I expose systemic issues, not individuals. When the truth is uncomfortable, some perceive it as divisive, but discomfort is necessary if we want change. A council aide whispered. He's rattled. Can you feel it? I can, Jamal said, voice low but audible, and that's expected. Authority built on unchallenged assumptions always reacts when questioned publicly. Across the room, community members shifted uneasily, unsure whether to speak up. Some nodded. Others avoided his gaze, hesitant to intervene. Jamal noticed the tension. The familiar fear of being labeled a troublemaker, the calculation of whether to ally with justice or remain silent. One attendee, an older man named Mr. Thompson, finally spoke. Councilman, we've seen patterns of harassment in our neighborhood. Some officers, like Monroe, make people feel unsafe just by walking home or jogging. How do we encourage witnesses to act without fear? Jamal's eyes softened. It starts with awareness and courage. Witnesses must know that silence enables injustice. Every citizen has the power to speak up, report, and demand accountability. But they also need support, protection, and guidance to do so safely. A young teacher added, We try, but some fear retaliation, not just from officers, but from colleagues, neighbors, even friends. It's complicated. Jamal nodded. I understand. That's why systemic change requires both policy and community support. Laws alone are insufficient. We need education, transparency, and leadership that protects those willing to step forward. Monroe, unaware that the panel was live-streamed, paced in his precinct parking lot, muttering into his phone. I can't let him control the narrative. He's just a kid. No one listens to him like that. This isn't fair. Back in the community center, Jamal turned to address another question. Accountability is not optional. Witnesses, whether officials, neighbors, or peers, have a responsibility. Silence may feel safer, but it perpetuates harm. Every voice counts. Lila leaned in, whispering, "You're making them think twice. I can see it on their faces." Jamal gave a subtle nod. "That's the goal. Change begins when people question assumptions they've held for decades." The room fell quiet as he presented a case study, detailing a pattern of minor complaints against Monroe, highlighting how repeated microaggressions escalated into systemic mistrust. He spoke with a calm authority that contrasted sharply with Monroe's escalating panic outside. "I've documented 10 complaints over the past year," Jamal said, "each minor on its own, but together they form a pattern. Residents report fear, humiliation, and avoidance. The system must acknowledge this, not dismiss it as perception." A journalist in the back asked, "Councilman, are you saying this officer has repeatedly violated trust?" "Yes," Jamal replied firmly. "And it's not just him. It's the culture that allows this behavior to persist without accountability. That's a systemic issue." Meanwhile, Monroe's office received messages from colleagues advising caution, but the officer ignored them. He was consumed with anger and disbelief. His authority, once unquestioned, was now scrutinized not just by Jamal but by the public. He paced, muttering under his breath, the weight of exposure beginning to erode his confidence. After the panel, Jamal walked outside with Kamal, the hum of the city wrapping around them. "You handled that brilliantly," Kamal said. "People are already talking about witnesses coming forward. They see they have support." Jamal exhaled, allowing himself a brief moment of satisfaction. It's not enough to call out injustice. It's about empowering others to act. Change isn't one person's job. It's a collective effort. Across the street, Monroe watched from his patrol car, phone buzzing incessantly with reports and commentary. He saw tweets, news clips, and live feeds showing Jamal speaking calmly but assertively. Monroe's face tightened, hands gripping the wheel. The public had witnessed the officer's bias. It was no longer a private humiliation. It was a systemic indictment. Inside Jamal's office, text messages continued to pour in from residents sharing their experiences, journalists seeking interviews, and colleagues offering support. Jamal responded patiently, carefully, ensuring accuracy and maintaining composure. Every response was measured, every word intentional. Marcus appeared in the doorway, leaning against a frame. He's panicking. PR teams are scrambling. He doesn't know how to respond without looking worse. "That's fine," Jamal said. "Facts speak louder than threats. Let him try to regain control. It'll only highlight the truth further." Later, as evening settled over the city, Jamal reflected on the day. The viral video had not only exposed Monroe, but had sparked conversations about responsibility, bystander action, and systemic accountability. Some witnesses, once hesitant, now felt emboldened. Others remained silent. But the seed of awareness had been planted. Tanya entered his office, placing a hand on his shoulder. "People are watching you, Jamal. They see courage, leadership, and truth. But remember, not everyone will act. Some will only observe. That's still important. Witnesses matter, even if they hesitate." "I know," Jamal said. "Even silence can be a first step toward acknowledgement. But the goal is action, support, and collective change. That's the work ahead." He looked out the window at the glowing city, streets alive with life, shadows and light intermingling. Monroe's presence lingered like a storm cloud, but Jamal's resolve was steady. Every witness, every conversation, every documented incident strengthened the foundation he was. The night had settled over Cedar Avenue, streetlights flickering faintly against the damp pavement. Jamal Carter walked briskly from his council office to his car, briefcase in hand, the weight of the day still pressing against his shoulders. His mind ran over the viral video, the witness panel, and the reports that had surfaced. Every step felt purposeful, but the quiet hum of the city hinted at tension lurking nearby. He noticed Monroe's patrol car parked across the street, engine off, shadows leaning into the interior like a predator waiting for a mistake. Jamal's pace didn't falter. He kept his eyes steady, aware that the night could be used to intimidate, but unwilling to let fear dictate his actions. Monroe stepped out, hands on his hips, eyes narrowing. "Carter," he said, voice low, almost venomous. "We need to talk." Now. Jamal paused but didn't stop. We already talk, he replied evenly. Publicly, privately, through reports, through evidence. What else do you want, Monroe? Monroe's jaw tightened. You're overstepping. You think this council seat makes you untouchable, but it doesn't. You think you can humiliate me, turn the city against me, and nothing will happen? Jamal took a deep breath, calm despite the tension curling like smoke in the night air. What's happening is accountability. Monroe, you've misused authority, harassed residents, and underestimated people who challenge you. That's not humiliation. It's justice. Monroe's fist clenched. Justice? You're 22. You know nothing about the real world. You call every complaint justice, every hesitation bias. You don't know what it means to hold power. I do, Jamal replied firmly. Power is responsibility. Authority is accountability. If you confuse fear for respect, Monroe, you're in the wrong business. The officer's face flushed, the heat of anger and fear mixing. You think this makes you a hero? People like you are dangerous. You undermine the system, the officers who keep the city safe. Jamal's eyes narrowed, steady and piercing. I don't undermine, Monroe. I expose, I protect, and I challenge. That's my job. That's the duty of every person in power who doesn't want injustice to thrive. Monroe took a step closer, voice rising. You have no idea what's coming for you. You're going to regret this. People like you think you're untouchable, but I'll make sure you pay. Jamal remained calm, his voice even but firm. Threats don't impress me. They never have. I see your fear, Monroe, and it's blinding you. You're afraid of losing control, of being held accountable, of being seen for what you really are. That fear isn't power, it's weakness. A siren wailed in the distance, slicing through the tension. Monroe glared at Jamal, the heat of anger giving way to disbelief. You think you can lecture me about fear and weakness? You're a kid, Carter. Just a kid. I'm the councilman, Jamal corrected, voice steady, and I represent every person who has felt powerless under your patrols, under your assumptions, under your abuse of authority. I may be young, Monroe, but youth doesn't equal weakness, and courage doesn't require age. Monroe's lips pressed into a thin line. You don't get it. Authority is about compliance. People follow orders because they fear the consequences. You don't understand that. I do understand, Jamal said softly, and that's why I speak up. Compliance without justice is tyranny. Fear without fairness is oppression. I will not be silent. The residents will not be silent, and the truth is stronger than your threats. Monroe's shoulders slumped slightly, a subtle sign of fatigue or realization. You think the city will back you over me? He muttered, almost to himself. Some already do, Jamal said, and more will once they see the facts. Authority that depends on intimidation doesn't survive transparency. People don't respect you because of your badge. They fear you because you abuse it. That fear doesn't last. Monroe's breathing was uneven. He took a step back, momentarily silenced by the weight of Jamal's words. You're just a kid, he said, voice cracking slightly. You can't know what it's like to carry responsibility. Jamal's expression softened, though his stance remained firm. Responsibility isn't measured by age, Monroe. It's measured by action, by conscience, by integrity. That's something you've chosen to ignore for too long. A car rolled by slowly, headlights illuminating the tense tableau. Jamal noticed a reflection on Monroe's badge, the gleam dulled by the night, a symbol of authority already losing its luster. Monroe's uniform, once a shield, now felt like armor too heavy to carry under scrutiny. You'll regret this, Monroe said again, voice trembling. You'll regret humiliating me. I don't seek regret, Jamal replied, voice calm, unwavering. I seek justice, accountability, and change. Your fear doesn't scare me. Your threats don't intimidate me. But your actions? They have consequences, and they're visible to everyone now. Monroe's hands shook slightly, and he stepped back toward his patrol car. Jamal could see the officer wrestling with his own ego, his authority crumbling as the reality of exposure sank in. The viral video, the council hearings, the community support, it had all reached a tipping point. Monroe had underestimated Jamal from the beginning, and now, standing in the quiet night, he realized that the young councilman was untouchable, not in spite of youth, but because of courage and clarity. Jamal straightened, adjusting his briefcase. You have a choice, Monroe. You can either acknowledge the truth, accept accountability, and learn from it, or you can continue to resist and watch your authority erode further. The decision is yours. Monroe said nothing, staring at the street ahead, jaw tight, phone forgotten in his hand. For the first time, he seemed less like the predator and more like a man confronted by the consequences of his own assumptions. Jamal turned and walked his car, calm, composed, the night air cool against his face. The confrontation was over, not with violence, not with threats, but with clarity, moral authority, and unwavering presence. Monroe's silence said more than any words could. As Jamal drove home, the city lights reflected off the wet pavement, mirroring the shifting balance of power. The viral clip, the council hearings, the community support, they were all part of a growing wave, one that Monroe could neither stop nor control. And Jamal knew the tide was turning. Monroe's authority, built on intimidation and assumption, had been publicly exposed. His fear, once invisible, was now palpable. Jamal's hands tightened on the steering wheel, not in anger, but in resolve. The confrontation had not been about proving Monroe wrong. It had been about demonstrating that integrity, courage, and truth held power far greater than fear and abuse. The city pulsed around him, alive, aware, and watching. Change, slow and deliberate, was in motion. And in that motion, Jamal felt the quiet satisfaction of justice, not vengeful, but inevitable. The morning sun cut through the mist over Cedar Avenue, casting a pale light on the city that had grown accustomed to its rhythms of routine and tension. Jamal Carter arrived at the city council building, briefcase in hand, every step deliberate, aware that today would mark a turning point. News coverage from the viral video had escalated overnight. Headlines questioned Monroe's professionalism, highlighted his microaggressions, and amplified complaints from residents. Inside the chamber, the atmosphere was electric. Council members whispered in hushed tones, aides shuffled papers nervously, and journalists lined the walls, cameras poised to capture every interaction. Jamal's presence commanded attention without a word. He was calm, composed, and prepared to confront the institutional biases that had long protected officers like Monroe. Councilman Briggs cleared his throat. Today, we review Officer Monroe's conduct in light of recent reports and public concern. Councilman Carter has submitted additional documentation for review. Jamal stepped forward, placing his folder on the desk. Thank you, Councilman Briggs. I've compiled resident statements, video evidence, and historical complaint records. Together, they illustrate a pattern of bias and harassment that cannot be ignored. A murmur ran through the room. Monroe, seated in the corner, shifted uncomfortably, adjusting his uniform as though it were a shield, but the thin veneer control was cracking. Pattern? Monroe spat, voice sharp. This is harassment of me. You're using selective examples to defame a public servant. Jamal met his gaze evenly. Officer Monroe, I am presenting facts. The pattern exists regardless of interpretation. Each complaint, each interaction, each resident testimony is verifiable. You can't argue against reality with denial. Councilwoman Whitman leaned forward, her tone cautious but firm. We must examine these claims thoroughly. The public deserves transparency and accountability. This is not about personal attacks. It's about trust in law enforcement. Jamal nodded. Exactly. Trust is earned through equitable action, not assumed by rank or uniform. Fear does not equate to respect. Intimidation does not replace accountability. The chamber fell silent as aides projected charts and graphs showing Monroe's patrol reports alongside resident complaints. The visual contrast was stark. While metrics suggested effectiveness, complaints and patterns revealed a consistent misuse of authority. Residents described feelings of harassment, anxiety, and intimidation, a reality the numbers alone could not capture. A young council aide whispered to Monroe, "Sir, this is public. Everyone is seeing it now." Monroe's jaw tightened. "They'll dismiss it. They have to." "Not this time," Jamal said quietly but firmly, as if reading Monroe's thoughts aloud. People are watching. The public sees what has always been there. Assumptions are falling. A journalist interjected. Microphone extended. Councilman Carter, are you suggesting this officer has engaged in systemic bias? Yes, Jamal replied steadily. And this is not an isolated incident. The system has tolerated this behavior for too long. Exposure and accountability are the only ways to restore trust. Monroe slammed a fist on the desk, startling a few nearby aides. This is absurd. You're turning my career into a spectacle. You have no authority to... Authority doesn't absolve responsibility, Jamal interrupted. It demands it, and the city has a right to expect accountability from those who hold positions of power. The council chamber smelled faintly of polished wood and stale coffee, the air heavy with anticipation. Jamal Carter stepped inside, briefcase in hand, and surveyed the room. Journalists had arrived early, cameras lining the walls like silent witnesses. Residents and community leaders filled the benches, a tangible presence of accountability. Monroe sat at the back, posture rigid, his uniform immaculate but his composure fraying. The officer's eyes flicked nervously between Jamal, the council members, and the recording devices capturing every word. This session was more than an internal review. It was a reckoning, and Monroe knew it. Councilman Briggs called the meeting to order. Today, we review the full findings regarding Officer Monroe's conduct, following recent complaints, public exposure, and council investigation. Jamal stepped forward, placing a thick binder of documentation on the desk. Thank you, Councilman Briggs. The evidence in this binder includes citizen complaints, video recordings, internal reports, and first-hand accounts. Each item contributes to a pattern of harassment, intimidation, and misuse of authority. While individual incidents may appear isolated, they collectively demonstrate a systemic problem. Monroe shifted in his seat. Systemic problem? You're framing me as a villain for following procedures. These are accusations, not facts. Jamal's gaze was unwavering. Facts are independent of perception. The repeated patterns, the testimonies, and the documented incidents speak for themselves. Compliance with procedure does not excuse harm or bias. Residents' lived experiences matter. They're as factual as any report. Councilwoman Whitman adjusted her glasses, her voice firm. Councilman Carter, can you outline the consequences that should follow when such patterns are confirmed? Jamal nodded. Accountability must be proportional to the actions and the harm caused. Recommendations include retraining, reassignment, suspension, and ongoing oversight. Importantly, transparency ensures trust is restored between law enforcement and the community. A resident, Mr. Thompson, stood, trembling slightly. I've been afraid to speak up for years. Every time Monroe patrolled our streets, my neighbors and I felt unsafe. We thought no one would listen. Today it feels like someone finally does. Jamal's voice softened. Your courage in speaking matters. Witnesses, residents, and community members are the pillars of accountability. Without their voices, systemic problems remain invisible. Monroe's hands clenched into fists on his knees. You think this is justice? You're destroying my career over perception. No, Jamal said calmly, leaning slightly forward. I am ensuring accountability. Justice is not destruction. It is consequence. Actions have consequences, Monroe, and you must face them. Councilman Briggs nodded. The council has voted to place Officer Monroe on immediate administrative leave, pending further review. This action is to ensure both fairness in process and restoration of public trust. The room murmured. Monroe's face paled. His hands loosened, gripping the edge of his chair, as though the very walls pressed down on him. The power he had assumed, the authority he had wielded as unquestionable, crumbled in plain sight. A journalist's camera caught the subtle shake of Monroe's jaw. Councilman Carter, what do you say to critics who claim this is political overreach?